Hello, and what happens if a narf gets scratched? Welcome to Best of the Rest, the show where we take a second look at movies that were poorly received upon release and challenge ourselves to only talk about the things we like and what the movie does well. It's M. Night Shyamalan month, and this week we are talking about the 2006 film Lady in the Water. My name is Chris Logan, and I am joined, as always, by my co-host that plays a secret role in this story, Andrew Williams. You ready for this one, Andrew?
Yeah.
Listeners could not see the big breath you took before answering. Boy, we got a heck of an episode on our hands here. First things first, what's your history with this movie? Had you seen it before?
I had not. I went into this movie pretty cold. I was off the M. Night train by this point. And even after I kind of got back on it a little bit later, I never went back to this one. It's not a movie that I've really thought about. It was not a movie that I felt I never felt I was missing anything by not going back and watching this. And the general reception, as we'll talk about in a little bit, seemed to echo those sentiments. So I had never seen it. I didn't even really, the only thing I'd really like it's called Lady in the Water, and I read somewhere that it takes place in an apartment building, and that was really all I really knew about it. So I went into this about as cold as possible as far as what it was about. Just knew the history, knew the reception, knew the general legacy of it. But yeah, but I was interested to dive into it in that regard, just simply because I'd kind of avoided so much about it over the years. So
Yeah. Unlike The Village, which had its reception, we talked about it last week, even the people that didn't see The Village knew the twists. Like, there was this thing that everyone knows about that movie. Lady in the Water, also not well received, financial bomb, we'll talk about it, but it doesn't have a twist ending and doesn't really have like this hook that's ubiquitous with the legacy of this movie. Like, people that didn't see this movie might hear one or two random things from it, but there's not like that one hook that everyone knows from this movie. Now, I saw this movie in theaters. I was very much on the M. Night Shyamalan train. As we talked about last week, I really, really liked The Village. So I had liked all of his movies up until that point. Yes, I'm ignoring Wide Awake. But all of the M. Night movies, Sixth Sense, The Sixth Sense. Oh boy, say that 5 times fast. I really enjoyed. So I saw this in theaters, and the trailers didn't give too much away. There's a lady in the water, of course. But just the fact that it was an M. Night Shyamalan movie, which is how it was heavily marketed, was enough for me to go see it in theaters. Like, I trust this guy. He has done no wrong. This is going to be interesting. Look, it's a hashtag positivity podcast. We're going to get to those positives, everything that works in this movie. It's what we do. But that opening weekend I saw it, sitting in the theater, it didn't take long for me to be like, this is a bad movie. Like, this isn't working. It's not like I got to the end and was like, oh, it didn't stick the landing. Like, it just fundamentally was not working for me throughout. It's one of the few times I've been sitting in a theater and like realized that early on, but you have to keep sitting there for 90 more minutes, And I distinctly remember thinking to myself, like, I will never watch that movie again. Like, there was nothing in there that I needed to visit again. And then, of course, 15 years later, Andrew, you're like, hey, I have an idea for a podcast. And then 3 years after that, we're sitting down recording this episode. Here we are.
Man, don't you pin this on me, my God.
I have watched this movie for a second time, and yeah, we're going to do what we do. I mean, there's no shortage of content about this film and Shyamalan's work. There's a book about this movie.
There's a book. I saw that.
Most of that content is going to be absolutely trashing this film, criticizing it, and That's fine. We're going to try to do something different, though. We're going to try to focus and find the things that work. It's what we're attempting today. Every now and then, a movie comes along that really challenges our premise. This might be one of them, but we are going to give it a shot. But Andrew, let's just set the stage here a little bit. The movie is released July 21st, 2006. It's made on a budget of $70 million. I believe his biggest budget to date. At the box office, it brings in $72.8 million. So that is a financial flop, barely covering production costs, not taking into account marketing and other expenses. It's losing money for the studio. Critically, it is absolutely panned. It holds a 25% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes. The word of mouth was not great either. Oh.
Yeah, the audience score here moving up to 49%. So
higher than I thought. I was a little surprised by that.
To be fair, it is higher than I thought. A very mixed. So the audiences are pretty split. Critics are pretty firmly in the negative here. It is actually not his highest budget. It's in the ballpark, but Unbreakable had a $75 million budget and Signs had a $72 million budget.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
But those both made, in the case of Unbreakable, $250 million. In the case of Signs, $408 million. Whereas, like you said, Lady in the Water, barely covering production costs, not even taking into account any marketing or anything of that nature. I would say this is the highest budget he has for a while, but it is not. We will talk more about those in the coming weeks, folks. Here recently, one of the biggest, I think, keys to his return to success is that he is moved to smaller budgets, even smaller than The Sixth Sense on some of his more recent movies. But yeah, we have a pretty high budget, one of the highest budgets of his career to that point. But we definitely have, again, not taking Wide Awake into account, we have his lowest box office by a significant margin. So I think this is definitely the movie where the allure maybe starts to fade, not just for the audience more so, but probably also for the studios. Although he's continued working since then. I mean, it's not really he's been consistent. He has a movie in 2008, 2010, 2013, 2015, 16. Like, he keeps working. And even has some television shows mixed in there. But this is definitely the first movie where the box office is not there.
Moving forward after this, it becomes more difficult to sell it only on his name, like you were able to do previously. They got to try some different things in the marketing moving forward. If you weren't off the M. Night bandwagon after The Village, this was probably the one that broke you. It certainly was for me. Of course, looking at the creative team, the movie is written, produced, and directed by M. Night Shyamalan. I believe every movie we're covering month, yeah. And I don't know. Looking at one thing I think I did know about it going in was that it was based on a bedtime story that he told his kids. I really couldn't find much more about it other than that. I assume an original tale that he made up to tell his kids at night, and then he fleshed it out to a film, I think, is the origins of this story. And I don't know. It feels like it. I don't know what else to say about that, really. But it's the first time where, like, his movies up until now have been built around a concept and almost like a subversion of expectations for a well-known supernatural trope. Sixth Sense is rewriting the ghost story. Signs is an original take on aliens. Unbreakable, superheroes. The Village is creatures in the woods. Like, it's all a new take on a familiar trope. And this movie, I'm just not seeing anything familiar in the story, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because the concepts that he's playing with are a lot more, not esoteric, but just a lot more niche. Like, I mean, Narfs are basically like, the creature of this film, the thing is kind of being told on, is like it's like a water nymph almost, like a naiad type thing, and that's just such a like out there kind of thing. Not saying that you can't, that they've never told stories about them before, but it's a much more niche thing, which is interesting in a way because it's something that you could kind of like, you would think there's no expectations. You could kind of build your own story with it because it's such a niche thing, but at the same time, he starts building the story he builds definitely feels like something that like you're telling a story to your kids and you have to keep coming up with another idea to keep the story going. It's like, and there's these 3 monkey things that hang out in the trees, and it's like, and it definitely comes through like that, but it is seemingly all from his brain, and he tries to build this whole mythology around this. Like you said, all these other ones are kind of these big, easy to identify concepts. With this, it felt like something where he was like, okay, there's no expectations, there's no ideas, there's not even any really preconceived notions of what this story should be or any notions that anybody has from previous stuff. It was really kind of a blank slate. And he runs with it. I'll give him that.
I just, before we cross this line, start talking all positives, Andrew, we watched The Village last week. You ended up liking it. It was your first time watching that movie. Even if you didn't love it maybe as much as I do, I know you're a fan of Unbreakable. I assume you like Signs and The Sixth Sense as well. Isn't it? It's genuinely hard for me to wrap my head around this being the same guy who made those movies, and this is the next film he makes after The Village. Not 10 years later. It's the very next project.
It's a very odd. It is hard to reconcile sometimes, and I've had that happen with other directors. No director bats 1,000. Like if this were a one-off, that'd have been one thing. Unfortunately, for many people, this was not a one-off, and this was either the continuing or the beginning of a trend. But every director has a movie where, like, almost every director has a movie where I watch it and I'm kind of like, I don't know if that. Like sometimes they miss the mark, but like Christopher Nolan, you think of something like for me, Tenet is a movie where I finished watching that the second time and I was kind of like, like I don't know if that script was quite as cooked as it needed to be when they kind of ran with. I mean, the lead character is literally just called the protagonist.
It's like naming your main character's story,
It's ridiculous. And who would do that? But the thing is watching Tenet, I still get out of that movie and I'm like, yeah, that's Christopher Nolan. Like it's not hard. While the movie doesn't work and I don't think lands very well compared to especially some of his highs, it's no doubt a Christopher Nolan movie. Like you don't watch that movie and leave with kind of the notion of like, oh, that's the guy who made Memento. You watch Tenet and you're just kind of like, oh, Nolan, you already made Memento. Why are you trying to do it again? But with this, it very much feels like this is somebody completely different. Like it doesn't feel like this is the guy that made those movies. And I'm not going to say that he has to like live in a genre or like live in a style. Like he can do whatever he wants, but it's much harder to reconcile Lady in the Water. Like if I watched Signs and Lady in the Water back to back, I probably would have been like, who made that second movie? It probably would have not even occurred to me that it was made by the same guy who made the first one, outside probably some stylistic directing choices. But yeah,
the fact that he himself shows up in both of them, that might be
that's true. He's a sizable character in this one too.
His biggest role yet, yeah. And that specifically drew a lot of criticism as well because of that character's role in this film. And we'll talk about it. I mean, inevitably we'll have to talk about some criticisms of this film. I don't think we can get around it, but I think we'll have to address that.
If I had to guess, just put kind of slowing. I think this might have been the movie where the ego showed through a little too much.
I think so. I think that's.
I don't want to say that he's wrong to think highly of his work, but between the sizable role he gives himself, which moves beyond like the Hitchcock cameos that he'd kind of done before, like, a few lines of dialogue, few things here and there, but not a supporting character like he is here. But you've got him as a full on supporting character. You've got the characters that just kind of have full on contempt for like film criticism and ideas. You've got the disagreements with Disney. You've got a lot of things here that really kind of show that he was really riding his own high. And I think he went a little too far. And he's hardly the first director that's had that happen. But if I had to kind of sum it up, I think that's kind of what happens here in a nutshell.
Well, Andrew, it's time we dive in. Let's talk about this film, Lady in the Water. You ready?
Yep.
Cleveland Heap is working as the superintendent of an apartment complex when he finds a water nymph named Story in the swimming pool. He learns from one of the older tenants that the water nymph is actually a narf, and she is here to give a message to a chosen human. Other people have been selected to play key roles in the journey, but no one knows exactly which role they are supposed to play. Cleveland asks a film critic for help, but he assigns everyone the incorrect role because he was unable to guess where the story was going. It turns out that only a child with a free imagination can appreciate this tale, and a young boy at the complex is able to read a secret message in cereal boxes to figure out everyone's role. Now the group of chosen heroes must hatch a plan to protect Story from the evil Scrunt, while a giant eagle carries her back home. If I'm lying,
Folks, that's
I'm
all
dying,
the time we have
Andrew.
this week. I want to thank you all for tuning in.
All right, before we break this down, Andrew, if anybody's listening that hasn't seen this movie, I just want you to know I did not exaggerate anything.
No,
I left
that plot
some
is
stuff
100%
out.
correct.
I left out the monkeys. Like there's some other stuff in here. We're gonna talk about it, but first, as we always do, we're gonna talk about the cast of the film, starting with the high point, the best casting and best performance of the movie. Because every episode we recognize one person who goes above and beyond the call of duty that they actually elevate the quality of the entire film with their performance. We recognize that person by giving them the Mark Strong Award. So, Andrew, go ahead and kick us off. Who is getting a Mark Strong Award for Lady in the Water?
There are a lot of people in this movie, but there is one man that basically has to anchor this whole thing and kind of carry this whole story. But I got to go Paul Giamatti as our superintendent of choice, Cleveland Heap. He is essentially, despite this movie being called The Lady in the Water, he is the lead of this film. He is the one that has to. He is like Story, kind of is the conduit for which the story unfolds, but he is the one kind of that discovers her, that runs around the complex, tries to find all the right groups, has to kind of pivot and make adjustments when things don't go wrong. He's got the tragic backstory that we find out throughout the course of the film that kind of comes out of nowhere, but he is essentially anchoring this whole thing. And obviously, alum of the show, back way back from Amazing Spider-Man 2. He is he's fantastic. Like he's Paul Giamatti is an amazing actor. He was in a movie just this year called The Holdovers. That was one of my favorite movies of the year. Probably going to enter into my Christmas rotation for sure. Just a wonderful actor that has been through every kind of potential role and always crushes it. And he is taking on a lot with this movie and taking on a lot with this script, but he is the anchor of it. And if there is anybody kind of holding it together, it's Paul Giamatti. He is giving it everything that he has to try to kind of carry these varying ideas and kind of center them all together and keep them kind of moving forward. And I think he does a very good job anchoring this movie. And like I said, he's just an amazing actor. He was also in The Illusionist the same year this came out, which was the Edward Norton movie that everybody compared to
The Prestige.
Prestige. And just it's so wild. It just looking at his career is such a wild, amazing thing to look at, because there's all these like prestige dramas mixed in with things like Fred Claus, and it's just
Big Fat Liar.
Yeah, like it's just such a weird, strange career.
He can absolutely do anything. I mean, from supporting character, kids movies, adult movies, lighthearted dramas, serious dark stuff, and he crushes it across the board. He is truly incredible actor. Also getting my Mark Strong Award, I should say. And I mean, this is no exception. It's a genuinely really good performance in the middle of this movie, anchoring it. I think what he has going for him here is most of the other characters we meet, especially like all the tenants of this apartment building, are very, I don't know what the gimmicky is the right word, but they're kind of defined by this.
They're
quirky.
They're kind of ciphers. They're like ciphers for a specific thing. Like they have a thing, and a gimmick is like, it seems too harsh to call them gimmicks, but like when you're introduced to everybody, like everybody has their thing. Like everybody has the thing that they do. Paul Giamatti is one of the only characters in the movie. This sounds really backhanded. Who is a character? Like
he's three-dimensional.
More to it. He's three-dimensional. There's a story. There's a backstory. So he gets a lot more to dive into than everybody else does, to be fair. And I think chews it all up wonderfully.
Also, all these other characters, as far as we see, like immediately buy into the story and get involved to want to help and find their place. But for most of this movie, Paul Giamatti gets to have this energy of like, okay, yeah, this is crazy, but if this is a real story, what happens next? Grandma, can you tell me a little bit more? Like this almost like, yeah, I can't believe I'm doing this, but I'm kind of curious. I have to see what happens next, because that's kind of how we're all feeling in the audience. Like, this seems wild, but I guess I want to see what happens next. And having that little kind of hesitation without diving all the way in, I think helps us relate to him a little bit more. And Paul Giamatti is just a great, relatable character, actor, I should say. I love when, I mean, Paul Giamatti is a movie star, right? I love when someone who doesn't have the traditional movie star looks becomes this famous and gets these roles. Like, I'm not surprised Brad Pitt's a movie star, or Tom Cruise, Mel Gibson, whatever, Keanu Reeves. But Paul Giamatti, John C. Reilly, William H. Macy, I love these guys who look, let's say, I don't know, distinct, get to lead these Hollywood films. And then all those guys I mentioned, pop up in small supporting roles, leading roles, different genres. It's great. It's truly like talent rising in them to the top. It's just nice to see,
Absolutely. And just, I William H. Macy is actually doing that thing now where he like tours with a movie. He watches the movie and then he does a Q&A, and he's doing it for Fargo in Chicago. Cool. And I'm kind of tempted to go see it just to hear him talk about it. Because this is a weird aside about Fargo. I was actually talking about, my mom was talking about this when I was in town recently, actually, about how there's actors and then there's like movie star type people, where like there's movie stars that like play the same character, like Dwayne Johnson, just playing Dwayne Johnson in almost every movie he's in. But then she was talking about how she just really appreciates like when people play wildly different characters. And William H. Macy came up about how you take something like Mystery Men, where he's basically playing Superman, and then you contrast that with something like Fargo, where he's like the most cowardly, sniveling, ridiculous character. And you're like, there's ability there. Paul Giamatti is very, very, very much in that same class for me, because you take something like Sideways contrasted with like
Amazing Spider-Man 2, where he's like
versus Big Fat Liar, versus something like The Holdovers, versus even something like Jungle Cruise, where he just shows up as these kind of ridiculous characters. And he crushes it every time. There's range there. There's ability. He can play heroes. He can play villains. He can play regular people. He can play larger than life. Like, he can do everything. And like The Holdovers this year, especially, I thought he was particularly excellent in. And the arc his character takes in that movie is actually genuinely pretty wonderful. So Paul Giamatti is just, what can you say? He's Paul.
It's Marty. All right, there's other people in this movie, Andrew. Last week, we had the realization on mic that Bryce Dallas Howard has appeared on our show more than anyone. I think it might not even be close at this point. And here she is, again, another Bryce Dallas Howard appearance. She plays Story, the titular lady in the water. The poster is like her face, real big, right front and center. Not in the movie a ton. I mean, screen time wise, I bet she's like third or fourth, I would guess. Important character, I guess. She's at the center of it. But, man, I don't know. Last week, I both of us really praised her performance. I think she's just so good in The Village. Here, she's doing almost none of the things she's doing there. Look, #PP, she's hardly a character. And I'm not putting this on her. I mean, it's written that her character is supposed to appear in this apartment complex. Someone is supposed to lay eyes on her, and that awakens something in them. And then her job is done, and she has to get home. That is all that is asked of her. Most of this movie, she is half naked, sitting in a shower, and characters are looking at her and trying to interpret signs. She whispers some stuff to Paul Giamatti. She never speaks above a whisper that I can think of. I mean, there's just not a lot there. It's being asked for her to do. Other than like look interesting, she has an interesting face, and they make use of that. And that's about, all that's asked of her. And for that, yeah, I guess she's doing a good job.
This poster reminds me of Twin Peaks a lot because there's like this iconic image of Laura Palmer kind of wrapped in plastic after she's found dead. And this poster somehow manages to look almost exactly like that. Even though she's not wrapped in plastic, she's not dead. It's still somehow giving me that same vibe.
She is very pale.
She's extremely pale. That might just be the red hair, to be fair. That's a struggle that I have endlessly all the time. But it is a very like iconic poster where you've got this this look, and I remember that look, but it definitely reminds me of Cheryl Lee as Laura Palmer in Twin Peaks. But otherwise, I agree with your thoughts. Like, there's not a lot to this character. There's just not a lot to really dive into. Not nearly the sense that she gets to work with in like The Village, where the second half of that movie is basically just her journeying through the woods. Whereas this, she's another kind of cipher for the plot of this movie. There's a lot of people that are only here to kind of prop up the plot, which feels like a weird thing to say because that's all characters do. But in this movie, it feels very much so like there's a lot of people that are only here to do something and then leave the story, kind of. And with her, she's kind of sitting as this kind of constant, but it's Cleveland and like the orbit of people around her that are kind of driving what needs to happen. Which means that, like you said, she spends a lot of this movie barely dressed, sitting in a shower. And like you said, there's just not a lot for her to dive into. But she is doing, I think it's a great example of she's doing exactly what's asked of her. And she's making the most of it.
Bob Balaban plays Harry Farber. This character is a film critic. A film critic in a film by a writer-director. Andrew's almost never a recipe for success. Sorry, #PP. This film critic thinks they know the role everyone is going to play. They believe there is no originality left in the world, no original tales to be told. He can predict anything because he knows how these things go. There's a scene where he hates that conversations in movies always happen in the rain. Why do they confess love in the rain? And whenever it's suggested that the rain is metaphorical, he simply says, no. He meets his demise in this movie. He's face to face with an evil creature, but he knows he's going to be safe because he recognizes that he's in a family film. And in these types of movies, the character is able to get away and pop up later having learned a lesson. But nope, he actually gets killed. So this film critic doesn't understand the story, never knows what's going to happen next. He's wrong, 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 wrong every step of the way. And it kind of makes you wonder, Andrew. It kind of makes you wonder what...
It doesn't kind of make me wonder, Chris. Very much. This is... I don't think we need to necessarily shy away from it. This was one of the criticisms of this film, was that this character seemed to be just openly mocking the idea of film critics, and this seemed to kind of be very much aimed at critics of his previous film, The Village, and possibly even poking some fun at the issues with Disney and the kind of formation of this film coming together. And it was something people pointed out, that they were kind of like, easy there, buddy. And it's something that anytime it's such a lose-lose thing too, because it's not really lose-lose, but addressing it in this way, I think, is like a lose-lose situation, because in this case you end up with something like this, I think, that's very, very in your face, openly hostile towards the idea of film critics at this point. And all it does is make you seem like you've got the thinnest skin in the world, because
especially
it's like, okay, not
when the film flops. I mean, it's really not helping.
Well, because at this point, The Village was still a financial success for the most part. Like, he was still being a successful director, but the critical reception, it felt like he had to address it with it just puts it on full blast here. Like, there's literally the film critic tells him the kind of people he needs to be looking for that need to assist story, and they're all wrong. Every single one of them is wrong. And that's, again, it's like the film critics are wrong. And it's like, yeah, but like, the film critics on Sixth Sense were a huge part of why that movie was so successful and how your name became this synonymous name. It's like, when the critics were helping you, it wasn't a problem. The minute they didn't like something you did, now I've got to publicly put them on blast in my film. Which, the flip side to this is that I love Bob Balaban. I think Bob Balaban is fantastic. And like,
I like this performance a lot. It's fun.
It's a fun performance, and he's definitely dedicated to it. And like the deadpan that he plays it with, like, where like he's asking for help. He's asking Bob Balaban's character for help in fighting these groups. And Bob Balaban gives him his ideas, and he just ends it with just like, anything else I can help you with during my nap time? And that's just that's absolutely something that I could see like myself saying, where I would just be like, all right, now I want to go back to sleep. Leave me alone. And like, he's so great in like almost everything that he does. He's definitely somebody that's like 100% a character actor. He's probably somebody you've seen but don't know his name. I remember him actually oddly from the television movie they made about the original Leno Letterman late night crisis in the like early to mid 90s when Johnny Carson retired. He plays Warren Littlefield, who was an actual executive at NBC. That was a big instrumental part of like how everything went down. That performance, I guess, liked well enough that when Warren Littlefield actually wrote a book, Bob Balaban did the audiobook for it, which I thought was cool. Not all of the performances in that movie were seen as well as that one was, and just he's been in so many things.
It's all the Christopher Guest movies for me that I
exactly, just stuff like Best in Show, A Mighty Wind, For Your Consideration. He had a run on Seinfeld where he showed up there for a couple of episodes. He's been everywhere, done all sorts of stuff. And another one I really like, it's a murder mystery called Gosford Park, directed by Robert Altman, and he's actually a producer on that. And he was actually, I think in some worlds, he's got writing credits on it as well. And just fantastic.
Andrew, every year, me and friend of the show, my wife, we throw a party at our house called a mac and cheesy movie party. Invite a bunch of people over. Everyone makes a mac and cheese inspired dish. There's a contest for best dish. Then, of course, we watch a cheesy movie. In the past, we've watched Mac and Me. We've watched some old kung fu films. But last year, the movie we watched was My Boyfriend's Back. And Andrew, I think that was your first time attending our Mac and Cheesy movie party because you live
I
across
believe
the
it
country.
was.
You happen to be here. You brought a wonderful dish, but we all watched My Boyfriend's Back, a film directed by this man, Bob Balaban, from the early 90s. I remember this movie vaguely from my childhood, and I always wanted to revisit it, so we all watched it together, and it was a hit at the party. That movie is great. It's this bizarre black comedy, totally weird. It's hard to even describe, but this high schooler dies, comes back as a zombie, and everyone just treats it like it's normal. Just kind of unfazed by it. His parents like capture a nearby child so he can eat because they're trying to be supportive of his new life.
Edward Herman is his dad in that movie is just so good. The way he plays that is so perfectly. The guy, I think it's Mary Beth Hurt plays his mom. Just so wonderful. I'd never even heard of this movie when I went to the mac and cheese party, and I brought a definitely not store-bought macaroni salad. And I just remember like just being like, I was like I looked at the critical response to that movie and I was like, no way. I was like, there's no way this is accurate. Like I was like, I'm not one of those people that tends to like be like the critics just didn't get it, but it kind of feels like they did. And now to be fair, I think that sample size is like 20 critics. Like it's not very many, but that movie, when I saw it was directed by Bob Balaban, I was like, no way. I was like, that's crazy. Because like I knew who he was and I was shocked by that. And it was wonderful. It's an absolutely wonderful movie. I thought it understood exactly what it was, understands the assignment, I guess, and like everybody in the cast feels like they do too. Matthew McConaughey as like a random dude in a movie theater. Like 10 seconds, that's it.
Speaking of rising to the top without traditional Hollywood looks, a young Philip Seymour Hoffman plays like a meathead in that movie.
So wild. And then that actually led me to looking into another movie that he had directed called Parents a couple of years before. And like that is another black comedy, almost horror film starring Randy Quaid and Mary Beth Hurt, who would later be in My Boyfriend's Back. And it is also just so unbelievably weird and eccentric, but it works so perfectly. Randy Quaid nowadays has got a little bit, mostly, I don't know if he's done anything to anybody. He's just weird and probably owes some taxes somewhere. But his performance in that movie is perfect. Like he's absolutely perfect for that role of like this kind of deranged 50s house husband. And I got a whole new appreciation for Bob Balaban after having watched My Boyfriend's Back and then later Parents. And he's great here, but it is a strange character to play, all things said.
Andrew, Jeffrey Wright is in this film.
He is
Mr.
indeed.
Jury. Maybe a Mark Strong Award winner. I don't know. We talked about him in the Batman. I don't remember if he threw him a Mark Strong Award. I know you're a huge fan. I have shared a bit of my criticisms of him, although I did like him in the Batman. I feel like a lot of his roles in more recent years, he really leans into the old grizzled thing, but he's a much younger man here. I didn't even recognize him at first.
Doesn't have a beard.
So yeah, that's it. So I don't have that criticism. I think he's a nice presence here, a nice calm presence. He's the one that kind of realizes, like, look, none of these roles are right. We don't feel like we're doing the right thing. And I like his calm presence and his level-headed way of speaking. I think it's right for this character. Yeah, Jeffrey Wright.
Yeah, he's Jeffrey Wright. I mean, he's fantastic. I mean, we did a Batman episode. What was our Daniel Craig Bond episode? Was it Spectre?
Yes.
He's not in that. But anytime he shows up, I like him quite a bit. I've always been a bit of a fan, even if like his Jim Gordon is kind of the prototype of every character he plays now, which I actually don't think is fair, because you should watch a movie called American Fiction, which is a movie that just came out, so you can't watch it yet unless you go to a movie theater. But
Okay.
in American fiction, he plays a it's based off a novel, but it's like this frustrated writer, oddly following a trend here, who so he jokingly writes like an outlandishly stereotypical like um it's called like it's literally like he writes a book where he's like a stereotypical black teen growing up, and he writes it like out of spite because he can't get any recognition, only for the book to actually get published, and he gets widespread claim and fame from it, but none of it's true and none of it's real, and so he's having to like pretend to be this fake character that he kind of created, and it's a very, very funny movie, and his performance in it I think is particularly great. But that one's written and directed by Cord Jefferson, who was a writer on Succession, Watchmen, and a whole bunch of other stuff. But I think you're sleeping on Jeffrey Wright. But here, I think he's playing a very interesting character. Like you said, he's the one that, like, from kind of the minute he gets picked as the interpreter, is kind of like, he's the one that's kind of like, look at us, man. Does any of this seem right? Like,
Yeah.
he looks at the group that are supposed to be the guild, and he's like, us? Like, are you sure? And it's pretty great. I like what he's doing here. Not a whole lot going on with him too. Like, being the puzzle guy is kind of his thing. He's the first interpreter that Cleveland goes after he talked to the film critic about like who the symbolist would be. And the critic was like, look for somebody who does puzzles. And it was like, the script was very subtle about it. But he goes and finds Jeffrey Wright. But like you said, he is the one that's kind of like, this ain't us, man. This ain't the thing. And they do find out who the actual symbolist is. And like you mentioned in the description, it's actually his son with his cereal boxes. I looked at cereal boxes all the time as a kid. I never saw any messages. So
I just did the maze over and over again on the back.
What a waste of space that I am. But anyway, I like Jeffrey Wright, but again, it's another performance where it's not a whole lot beneath the surface. He's the puzzle guy. But that kind of little bit more he gets to dive into of being the one that's like, this isn't right, makes him stand out a little bit more for me than some of the others.
Sarita Chowdhury plays Anna Rand. And I like this character. There's a few characters, or I'll say, like, by and large, the supporting characters in this movie I would describe as, like, happy and optimistic, which is kind of nice, Andrew. Other than our evil film critic who's a bit of a grouch, most of these characters are happy to help.
I mean, Chris, have
positive.
you met people, though? I'm just saying, I get why he's... Yeah, just it's like he's a grouch, and I'm like, yeah, but have you met people, man? I get why he'd be a grouch.
Have you seen movies? Yeah. But I like this character a lot. This is I mean, she's a sister of a certain character that we'll talk about here in a moment, but she is happy to help. She really has a connection with story, and she's able to kind of interpret through simple communication what she's trying to say, and that's it. She's happy to help. That's kind of what defines her character, I think. But it's nice.
Yeah, it is, and she ends up being kind of an assistant in her own way to Story when they're trying to get the groups together. She ends up being a part of the actual guild that is going to help Story. She's one of the 7 sisters, which is made up of 5 sisters and 2 unrelated people. But
they are sisters, Andrew, just not with each other.
That's true. Blood is not the only way to be family. But you're right. She's got this optimism and this kind of hope and this, like you said, eagerness to help through all of it. Like, she questions it, but she's willing to go along with all of it, especially as things kind of get going. And it's really a nice change of pace from everybody that's kind of like, what? So I think it's a great performance. I think she, like I said, she gets to stand out a little bit more than the others. She's got a little bit more to work with, and she's one of the bright spots in the movie for sure.
Cindy Chung plays Young Soon Cho, who I would also describe as happy and optimistic and willing to help. And she is the really main person feeding the story, the legend to Paul Giamatti's character, because her mother heard the story from her grandmother, but Young Soon has to translate the story to him in bits and pieces throughout the movie. Her hair reminds me of Rufio to the point where I almost think it's got to be intentional. But she's given a little things to make her a little more three-dimensional. You know, she dresses and seems like a party girl, but she's really focused on studying and making good grades. But she likes to go out to the club, but hide it from her mom. There's some fun little stuff sprinkled in for her. But again, just a fun character.
Yeah, a lot of fun. Like I said, a little bit more here with her being kind of the one giving the story to Cleveland so that he can try to kind of figure out what's going on here. And there's like a weird back and forth where like she has to ask her mom to tell her the story, but her mom doesn't speak English. So it's this back and forth. I love the scene on the phone where like he has the phone and he asks her something. She's like, give me back to my mom. And then the mom gets back to him. It goes back and forth. Makes for some fun, lighthearted interactions in a movie that can be kind of dour at times. But yeah, just a fun character.
Freddie Rodriguez plays Reggie. Now, if there's anything in this movie that maybe people have heard about without having seen it, if you have somebody that's seen the movie and they tell you just one thing about it, and it might be this character, because this character only works out half of his body, just his right side. So he's got a massive right arm and a wimpy left arm. He's got a massive right thigh, and he's doing it as like an experiment, he says. I remember the first time I saw this movie, I didn't know who Freddie Rodriguez was, but I couldn't get out of my head that it was John Leguizamo. I knew it wasn't. Like, he's younger. It has to be a little bit de-aged, but he kind of talks with that slight lisp and just really, I feel like he's channeling John Leguizamo here. And then in M. Night Shyamalan's next movie, he cast John Leguizamo. But I would later see Freddie Rodriguez in Grindhouse, Planet Terror specifically as El Rey. A lot of fun there. A lot of fun here. Another just genuinely happy character. Weird that he's doing this thing, but he's happy to tell everybody about it. He ends up playing a key role in the very, very end of this film. Andrew, do you think it's possible to work out half your body and get results this extreme?
No.
No?
No.
It kind of makes sense in a childlike way, but like intellectually, I know it probably can happen, but why not? What happens to your left arm if you only work out your right arm every day?
I just don't think the results would be that stark. I think that it just can't. Maybe it does work that way. I am by no means a fitness / muscle / workout expert. I'm the guy that plays hockey and I'm sucking wind after 10 minutes. And that's being generous. So I don't know. Maybe it does work that way. I've no idea. Like, don't get me wrong. If you're only like lifting on your right arm, it will look sizably larger than your left arm. But like the movie almost makes it like comically different. Like,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
really amp that up.
He reminds me of like remember Arkham Asylum and the inmates to take like that Titan juice, and so they all bulk up. It's like half of his body did that.
Like that weird like Mr. Hyde thing in like League of
Yeah, like mid transformation.
Like, but like in League of Assault, like there's people in League of, like when he takes it, like he is lopsided and he's like very strange looking, and it's I didn't think I'd be thinking about that movie again. But yeah, it is. It's and he's another character that we see him and we see this weird muscly arm and we're kind of like, that's interesting. And for most of the movie, you kind of just think that's his weird thing, but he also again comes back and has an important role to play.
Bill Irwin plays Mr. Leeds, alum of the show, Bill Irwin, because we talked about him on How the Grinch Stole Christmas, directed by Ron Howard, father of Bryce Dallas Howard.
It all comes back around.
He is a lot of fun there. We talked about there how he is a professional clown in mime, which really came into play in his role as a Who. I know him from Elmo's World, where he's Mr. Noodle. Not to confuse with Mr. Noodle or Mr. Noodle's brother, Mr. Noodle, or Mr. Noodle's other brother, Mr. Noodle. And it's funny because outside of those roles, he does these really serious things. Like his character here is deadly serious. And he shows up in Law and Order SVU as a deadly serious psychologist that Olivia Benson goes to see. So definitely got some range. Uh, but I like this guy. I like anytime he shows up. And he's like, I don't know, his character here, like I respect him like he's a dad. I'm like, yeah, what you're saying is important.
Yeah. He's Yeah, I mean, yeah, we said everything we need to say about him on the Grinch episode, but yeah, his character here is very interesting, a very deadly serious, and he's somebody that sits in the background and then towards the end of the film has his important role to play, sensing a trend here.
One last person we need to talk about, Andrew. M. Night Shyamalan plays Vic Ran. This character is the one that Story was sent to find. Because upon seeing her, yeah, he is the vessel, and he has an awakening inside. It feels like pins and needles. And he is able to convey a profound message about humanity after that. He is going to write a book. He's already started writing it, but has been suffering from some writer's block. But after seeing Story, is able to write again, and she is able to tell the future. And she says that his book is going to inspire many people, including a young boy that will go on to be president of the United States and bring about a lot of good change based on his ideas. He's a very important guy, Andrew. He extrapolates from her story that he won't be around to see those changes because the young boy in the future never seeks to meet him, so he must be dead. So a bit of a martyr in that way. And it's played by our writer, producer, and director, M. Night Shyamalan.
Yeah, it's and like I think the last thing that Story even says to him is like, your sister is going to have 7 children and you will see 2 of them. Which what a like, what do you even do with that? Like knowing when the end is going to come. But yeah, M. Night Shyamalan playing like a man who will literally save the world, it seems like. And what a subtle way to portray that message.
I will say there's issues here we're obviously addressing, but this is his largest role he's played in one of his movies so far, and probably to date. I haven't seen all his films. I don't think he plays a bigger role than this. It's beyond a cameo. He's got actual dialogue and lines. He's in a lot of scenes, and I think it's totally fine. Like if I didn't know this was our director, if I didn't know this wasn't like a true actor, I wouldn't have guessed. He doesn't like stand out like he's really different. He fits in just fine with the cast. So while there might be issues with the meaning behind him playing this role, I think he's talented enough at being an actor that it doesn't stand out. How about that?
Right. Yeah. He fits into it still is an ensemble. He's only got specific things he needs to do. It's not like he needs to carry the whole film himself. So he is seemingly casting himself to his own strengths and weaknesses. And it works. Like I said, you never feel like he's woefully out of place. I know he got nominated, I think, for the Golden Raspberry for Worst Supporting Actor. And I was like, yeah, this is just lazy. But just an easy thing to go, haha. But yeah, like, the context and the greater image aside, he's fine. He fits perfectly in with what's going on here.
Andrew, that is our robust cast. That means it's time that we talk about the scenes of this film. And we're going to start with the high point, the best scene of the movie, our personal favorite. Andrew, in your opinion, when is this film firing on all cylinders? What is the best scene in Lady in the Water?
I think it is when the true group is assembled. And so we had our original guild made up of some characters that basically all just hang out and smoke. This group includes like Jared Harris, who's like another well-known character actor, Joseph D. Reitman, kind of another noted character actor. Jared Harris might be an alum of the show. I feel like he might be. I don't know what it would have been that we talked about. But Uh, man, I don't know. I feel like we've talked about him before, but I can't remember.
Guy makes a lot of movies. I don't know.
He does. Anyway, they're basically the original guild group. Jeffrey Wright picked as our original symbologist, and
Morbius.
Yes, Morbius. You're right. And Mary Beth Hurt from a variety of different movies, as we just established, including Parents of My Boyfriend's Back, is originally pegged as the healer. Now, these turn out to all be wrong. They are not the right groups. They are not the right people. They are not the right people to help story get taken away by this giant eagle. Not to be confused with Giant Eagle, the name of a grocery store in Pennsylvania. Now,
is that really?
Once that, yes,
this movie takes place in Pennsylvania, right?
It does indeed.
That's kind of funny.
Yeah, or as people in Pennsylvania call it, Giant Eagle. But it is a. So once that plan falls apart and none of it works, they're forced to kind of recalibrate. And this is actually when Jeffrey Wright's character, Mr. Dury, kind of has his moment of like, this isn't, no. And they start thinking about who could be the actual groups. And this is when Mr. Dury finds out that they're kind of put together that his son is actually the symbologist, and that the guild is actually made up of 7 sisters, not 7 dudes that smoke. And so this is when they kind of seek out throughout the apartment building, and they really kind of formulate everything together. The only problem here now is we have the guild, we have the symbologist, but we still don't have the healer. And this is when our new symbologist kind of runs in and says, no, it says they're actually led by, it's a man that leads them. And this is when we finally realize that Cleveland himself is actually the healer. And the key to healing story is for him to kind of stop running from his own traumas that he's been feeling that have led him to kind of be in this situation. The story being that he was a doctor who, during a break into his house, his wife and children were killed, and he just kind of ran away to be this maintenance man at an apartment building. And he's kind of been running from that ever since, basically concerning himself with the needs of others versus ever kind of addressing anything for himself. So this is yet another movie where somebody plays Superman. But the emotion that Paul Giamatti brings to this scene is palpable. It feels real. He makes it feel very emotional and very powerful. And by embracing that trauma, he's able to heal story so that we can kind of move forward with her departure, such as it is. And I think Paul Giamatti is fantastic. He makes this scene work. But just kind of the formulation of the proper groups, everything coming together, I think that scene does work. And Paul Giamatti's performance gives it an emotional weight.
Yeah, that's fair. It's definitely this thing of assembling the right people in the right roles is like the driving force of this story, and this is it's the climax of that when the last piece clicks into place. It makes sense as a favorite scene. I just I read the last point that Paul Giamatti is, like most of this movie, just really carrying that scene emotional weight. I mean, if it weren't for his performance being so dialed in,
absolutely,
so much of this would absolutely fall apart. And some people might say it does anyway, but if there's anything holding it together, it's all Paul Giamatti here. So yeah, that's a good pick. I'm gonna go a lot more specific. Man, this is #PP a bit tough. But I will say M. Night Shyamalan is a good visual storyteller. He knows where to place the camera. He does a lot of interesting stuff with how he conveys the story, how he presents it to us. And I think some good examples of that are whenever, as we talked about before, he's talking to Young Soon to get the story, but she's got to translate it from her grandma. The one I'm going to highlight here is really the first time he's doing that. He goes to their apartment. He's standing in the doorway, and we get this reverse shot. We've got him standing in the doorway, and then we have Young Soon and her grandma standing just outside the kitchen. And it goes back and forth between these two shots a few times. He asks her a question. Grandma starts answering. Young Soon is translating in real time. It goes back and forth. And he's getting real caught up in the story because he's starting to kind of believe it because he's met the character, excuse me. And it cuts to Paul Giamatti and he goes, "What happens in the story? Please." It cuts back to the other shot and it's just Young Soon now. Grandma's left. And so Young Soon has to go into the kitchen. The camera pans over. She's back to cooking and she's got to coax her back out to continue the story. And it just makes this little joke out of Grandma just losing interest and walking away, told through visual storytelling with the camera. And at least I can appreciate that in this movie. There's a lot of examples of it. I've got a lot of notes about his camera placement and visual storytelling there, but that one in particular, I'm going to highlight as my favorite. I also really like the one on the phone that we talked about earlier, where he's pacing in the hallway outside, passing the phone inside to Grandma, comes back outside to him for Young Soon to translate. Also very fun. But this first interaction, I'm going to pick for my favorite.
I think it's a great pick. It's just a fun scene. And yeah, Grandma or her mom, I guess. I don't know if it's her grandmother. I don't remember.
I keep calling her Grandma, but I think it is her mom. Yeah.
But yeah, just no interest whatsoever in telling this story to Paul Giamatti at all. The increasing lengths he goes to get more and more from her are pretty funny and make for some lighthearted moments. Yeah.
Young Soon suggests that Mom needs to see him as an innocent child to want to tell him the bedtime story.
Ridiculous.
Talk about Paul Giamatti going for it in this movie. He sits 100%. On the couch, chugs a big glass of milk. It's on his mustache. He doesn't wipe it off, and he curls
lays
up,
down,
lays down. He kicks his foot like Stewart from Mad TV. It is.
Look what I can do.
Ridiculous.
Yeah, just absolutely ridiculous. But he is the greatest actor of all time for a reason. So
it's true. No arguing with that.
Dedication. But yeah, I think this is a good pick. All of these scenes are fun, but I think the first one in particular really sets that tone and works pretty well.
I also really like the opening shot of this movie. I mean, we have this opening narration with some cave drawings and stuff, giving us some backstory. But the first
shout out to David Ogden Stiers, who is the narrator for that opening narration.
Good call. Oddly uncredited. I don't know why you do that, but good call. The very first shot of the movie, the camera is underneath the kitchen sink, and we have Paul Giamatti facing us with a broom in his hand. And behind him, you can see out of focus is the family that lives in the apartment. And he's describing this, I don't know, bug, rat, he says it's furry, thing that he's going to kill for them. And it's a pretty long scene. And he's like, all right, I'm gonna kill it. And he raises the broom, and it's all told through this one shot. It's just really smart, efficient storytelling, because the family behind him is freaking out and they're saying things to him, but they're out of focus, but we can see him enough that we see the reaction. Paul Giamatti giving it his all, because there's nothing he's actually stabbing. It's all, the art of acting. And I just love that he whacks it and it's not enough. And he does it 5 more times. I don't know what this thing is that he's killing.
Keeps doing it. Yep.
In the middle of it, he just goes, "Sorry, this is taking so long," as he's killing this thing. And then finally, all right, it's dead. Really, really fun, opening scene. I like these scenes of him just going around being the super, fixing things. One of my notes says that Paul Giamatti would be a really good Super Mario in a live action movie. I don't know if he's Italian. I'm sorry, but seeing him with this tool bag and this gut, his receding hairline, throw a cap on that for Mario, I think it would be a very great interpretation of the character.
I would love to see it. I'm sad we haven't seen it.
Freddie Rodriguez could be his Luigi, just kind of remaking our 90s.
Too bad there's not a thing. Too bad there's not a thing that makes one half of your body big in Mario. That would be perfect.
Eats half a mushroom.
I feel like that just makes you all grow 50% larger instead of 100%. But No, yeah, I think the scenes of Paul Giamatti, like, and it's interesting because like you can see there's a weariness to him. You can see that there's like he's definitely like he's seen some stuff, and you find out later that's very much true. But all the scenes of him just being the super are pretty fun.
There's this really small joke that I kind of liked. The characters that we initially think are the guild, just a bunch of long-haired dudes hanging out in an apartment smoking all day, stoners. And they're like, we need to come up with a phrase we can like put on a t-shirt. And one guy's like, blim blam. And they're like, what? What does that mean? And they'll like mock him for it. And a few scenes later, Anna Rand, the M. Night Shyamalan's character's sister, is kind of like gossiping about Story. And she thinks that Story is just drunk because she seems kind of ill. And like, she says she's wearing no clothes except his shirt. Blim blam. And then she continues her story. Like she works in blim blam into like it's caught on in this apartment complex, this dumb slang. That was kind of fun.
Yeah, it was fun. Just like it just kind of shows the weird sense, I guess, of sort of community that these people have built, because a lot of these people have been here for a really long time. And just, yeah, fun.
Andrew, we should probably talk about some of the special effects and creatures in this movie. I think the Scrunt looks pretty cool. Like a big scary dog with red glowing eyes. There's some interesting rules to fighting it. You can only see its eyes if you're looking in a mirror, walking backwards, and only the Guardian can face him because the creature is paralyzed when you stare into his eyes. I don't know. That was kind of a lot, but creature design, get a thumbs up. He likes these porcupine-like spikes coming out of creatures and growls. We used them in the last film and uses them in here. I think it's effective.
Yeah, it's an interesting design too, because obviously it's designed to blend into the grass. So like the look of it has this. There's like blades of like it can settle into the grass. You can't see it. Yeah. So when it rises up, there's this very, very unique look where it's kind of got this camouflage look for where it specifically hides all the time. And when it's stalking the building, and specifically when it kills our film critic, you can kind of see it full form, and yeah, pretty gnarly look there.
Yeah. Maybe the most intense scene for me was whenever as you know, when a Narf is injured, she needs a certain type of mud called key that she keeps where she lives to heal. And we all know this. I don't know why I'm repeating it to you, but he has to go retrieve some key from the swimming pool. And he dives down. He opens up this grate and dives down into like this cave she has down there, retrieves the mud, but then gets locked in. And I can hear like the Sonic music playing in my head when you're underwater, like about to run out of air. These kind of scenes always freak me out. Characters can hold their breath for so long in movies, but there's this shot where like she has upside down glasses down there because she's like stealing items, and he holds up the glass. He puts, I think, a pin that he uses as a straw into the glass, and then breathes the air that's trapped in the glass. And you see the water rise in the cup as he breathes out the air. I gotta wonder, like, did he actually do that? How did they shoot that? Because it seems like a total movie thing, like breathing through a straw, trapped air. Like, I don't know. That seems very difficult to actually do. But the fact that you can see the water move up in the glass, I thought was a really cool touch. Makes me wonder how they shot it. And this scene made me feel tense.
Yeah, like obviously he's trapped, and so there's the isolation, there's the claustrophobia, there's the kind of all of those things that kick in. I assume he just actually was breathing there, and like when he used the straw to breathe in the air, when he breathed it back out, the water that's at the bottom got displaced by the air that he put into the glass.
I mean, I get the science behind it, but like that, I don't know if I could do that. Like, I don't know. That seems.
I'm sure that like. He could easily move to safety like 3 feet above him, but yeah,
next time I'm in the bath, I'm gonna take a cup of water and a straw, see if I can pull this off.
So I'll head to the pool over at the Park District, see if I can get some answers here. But But yeah, that was a very tense scene. It was pretty cool.
Andrew, I've seen this movie now twice in my life after, saying I would never watch it again. I have. There's some, M. Night didn't suddenly forget how to be a visual storyteller, moving from one movie to the next. So there is some stuff here I can appreciate. I do like if there's any message in this bedtime story, one of the characters says it. I think Young Soon says it. It's that the moral of the story is we don't know the role we're going to play. And I kind of like that. Like, everyone matters. Everyone's important. We just can't always see how we're going to affect everybody, but we will. We are. I like that. There is something there. Overall, my opinion of the movie has not really changed. I doubt I will watch it again, but there are some things there. But I look forward to moving on to the next M. Night movie at this point. What say you, Andrew?
Same. It's an interesting film to watch, and I actually would be interested reading the book that got published about it.
I want to check that out for sure.
I may actually seek that out simply because I'm really interested, because the book kind of, and I'm a little wary just because the book feels like it might be presenting, M. Night as like taking these bold risks for his creative visions, and it just kind of sounds like and maybe it does address that he just got a little too much in his own way there. But
well, the full title of the book is The Man Who Heard Voices, or How M. Night Shyamalan Risked His Career on a Fairy Tale and Lost. So, I don't know. I don't know how pro or anti Shyamalan, how objectable it is. Objectable? Is that the right word? Objective?
Objective.
It's got like the cover and back cover are like these photo shoots with M. Night. I don't know, but I'm interested. I'll say that.
Yeah, it looks like it's got pretty decent reviews too. So I may have to investigate this, see if I can find one. It looks like I can get it on Amazon pretty cheap. But yeah, it just sounds like this was a really interesting scenario. Like I said, maybe the first instance where the ego got the better of him. He had a script that, he put a lot of, his own thoughts into, had disagreements with studios, kind of decided he was going to do his own thing, did rewrites to that script, and it's interesting. So I would be curious in seeing the full context of it. But otherwise, yeah, I can't say that I'm going to go back to this one anytime soon.
Andrew, can you feel that? What's coming up next week? It's The Happening.
Yay.
Have you seen that one?
No. Again,
another
I know
one,
the twist, though.
Another one that I saw in theaters. We'll dive into it next week. I got a story to tell about that opening weekend. I remember the marketing for that one being the first R-rated film from M. Night Shyamalan. This is when they started trying to like mix it up, because at this point I don't think you could just say like the new film from M. Night Shyamalan. So putting the emphasis on it being R-rated, like the gloves are off, was kind of the approach they took there. There's some visuals in that trailer that are certainly compelling, and we'll talk about the finished product next week. Man, I'm excited you get to finally see that one. And we get to talk about it. But before we get there, for now, it's time for our question of the week. And if you want to ask us a question for a future episode, you certainly can. All you have to do is join our Discord server. There's a link in the show notes. It is free. I'm not asking you to sign up for anything if you've never used Discord before. It's just a social media platform, a place for communities to get together and hang out, talk about stuff. In the case of our server, mostly we're talking about movies and other nerdy things in the community. And there's a spot for you to leave questions for the podcast, just like this question left by Caboose. Here's what they say. could Rocksteady get himself on the endangered species list being a rhinoceros? And would that kind of act like diplomatic immunity?
Great question,
All right.
Caboose. So the correct answer to this question is yes, but the problem, and the one that you didn't address, is that Rocksteady would not be the only mutant in the Ninja Turtles world put onto the endangered species list. A great many rest of them would be. So what you would be dealing with would be a situation where both the heroes and the villains are both on the endangered species list. So does that mean they're now protected? Possibly, but it means they're all being protected. So who knows what kind of turtles were morphed into the Ninja Turtles? They could also be an endangered species. What kind of warthog turned into Bebop? You know, what kind of fly turned into to Baxter Stockman? Like, we don't know the answers to these questions. But by the nature of the fact that all of these mutants are essentially one-offs, they are all de facto endangered species now.
Okay,
here's the other question. Because they're human hybrids, are they actually considered an endangered species, though, or does the human piece of it override the animal piece of it?
I have like 10 follow-up questions here. Okay. So one of them is what you're getting at here. Like, depending on which turtle story we're following, sometimes they are purely animals that become humanoid. Sometimes they are reincarnated humans. Sometimes, you know, each mutated animal has its own backstory. Sometimes it's a human mixed with animal DNA, et cetera, et cetera. So, with the fact, okay, let's try to focus the question here. Rocksteady get himself in the endangered species list being a rhinoceros. So, I believe the common origin of Rocksteady is he starts off as a human and then gets rhinoceros DNA. I think that creates a new species, a one-of-a-kind species, and that gets him on the list, regardless if the rhinoceros itself is endangered. He is a new species. That's how I read that.
And that was kind of what I was getting at when I said they're all technically now endangered species because they're all basically one-offs. That's how I would view it as well. I would be like, yeah.
What can you do with this diplomatic immunity? Like, what are we getting at here? Like the turtles aren't going to kill them. The turtles wouldn't.
You haven't seen Lethal Weapon 2, have you?
No, I have not.
No. So there's a character in that movie that has diplomatic immunity who keeps using it to escape culpability for his actions. So the argument would be twofold. It would be by having the diplomatic immunity of being an endangered species, do the crimes that Rocksteady commit no longer, he has immunity from culpability for them. And also it would mean the turtles couldn't actually go after him for him because of said diplomatic immunity. Because if he's got immunity, it means no matter what that's actually also a misnomer of diplomatic immunity. You can't just do anything you want with diplomatic immunity.
This feels like a Double Jeopardy, the movie interpretation of a law to me.
Because, well, in the movie, in Lethal Weapon 2, they very much present his diplomatic immunity as I can literally do anything I want and not have any consequences.
Right.
And then the end of the movie is pretty cool because he finally shoots the dude and he's like, it's been revoked. It's, you know, Danny Glover gets a cool moment there. But
well, I don't need to see the movie now, Andrew. Thank you.
Yes, you do.
I was about to watch Lethal Weapon 2.
No, you weren't. Don't lie to me, Chris. But so I would fall into the category that, first off, they would all be captured and subjugated to intense, rigorous testing and then never allowed to see the light of day again. So they would never actually be able to use that diplomatic immunity for anything.
Yeah. Yeah, I think at the end of the day, the fact that they are endangered species is not going to benefit them as criminals at all. I think you're right about that. But Caboose, you've given us a lot to think about. Does anyone else interpret this in any different ways? Can you think of an advantage a supervillain would have by being on the endangered species list? Maybe it can help them in international waters. Maybe it can help with, not being extradited depending on where their native land is. Villains should look into this. I want to hear your thoughts. Let us know in that Discord server or find us on social media. Shoot us an email, BOTR, what's our email? bestoftherestpod@gmail.com. Let us know. Oh boy. We will continue with M. Night Shyamalan month. Come back next week for The Happening. And until then, just remember that maybe not every movie is great.
But all movies have greatness.
Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. You can follow him on Instagram at NotThatMarkAnthony, and thanks to Mitch for the music. Check him out on Twitter at I'm a Biggie Boy, and check our show notes for his SoundCloud link. Check out our store on TeePublic for some Best of the Rest merch, and if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. That is the only way that we grow. And follow us on social media at BOTRcast. Thank you.
Skadoosh.